This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Taliban co-founder in Kabul for talks as evacuation of foreign nationals continues. The UN warns that Islamic State terror group is spreading across Africa. And a high number of teen pregnancies cause alarm in South Africa. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi, and for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Records broken at World Under-20 Athletics Championships in Nairobi. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. Let's begin with reports that the brother of the exiled Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani has declared his support for the Taliban. The former president left Kabul on Sunday as the Taliban surrounded the Afghanistan capital. One of the founders of the Taliban is now in Kabul for talks on forming a new government. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar landed in the country earlier this week from Qatar, where he represented the group in talks. His arrival comes with the country gripped by uncertainty. Evacuations continue out of Kabul, but many people have been unable to reach the airport, stopped at Taliban checkpoints. The U.S. and others are facing a storm of criticism for acting too slowly in the run-up to the Taliban's takeover of the capital. Earlier, we talked to reporter Marialai Abasan, who was there.
The situation and political era is accelerating, and there have been many meetings between former President Hamid Karzai and High Council for National Reconciliation Chief Dr. Abdullah and Taliban officials, including their governor to capital Kabul, Abdurrahman Mansour, just met this evening with former President Hamid Karzai and Dr. Abdullah. And at the same time, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar has arrived, and he is expected to be holding several meetings with Hamid Karzai, Dr. Abdullah Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, and those who have already established a new council for the coordination of the transitional of power. There are some fractions and also resistant forces led by Commander Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, Ahmad Massoud, and there are reports that they have captured at least 3 districts in northern Baghlan province, and at the same time, the Taliban officials say they are trying their best to make a political settlement with all, and they have no enmity with it. So we are just waiting for Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the co-founder of Taliban, that who will he meet with and what will be the expectation after they meet. And it's a vacuum of the government in the country, and the administration is already crushed. No one goes to the offices, and system is already paused, but the city is calmer than before.
Let's dive a little deeper. We are joined by Obaidullah Bahir, lecturer in peace studies at the American University of Afghanistan. Obaidullah, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us here on Africa Live. The Taliban is offering an inclusive government and promising to respect people's rights. Should the group be taken at its word?
Well, it depends where you look at it from. I think the Afghan people within Afghanistan don't have any other option than taking them for their word. It's a good start, at least. Them saying it, them trying to act on it is a good start to see, but we'll have to wait and see as to how inclusive that government is, whether participation is guaranteed for all sides of the conflict. That is yet to be seen.
All right, Obaidullah, if you ask me, an inclusive government is seen as one of the ways of avoiding a fallout. Which parties would be expected to be in that government? From your perspective, how do you see it?
Afghanistan for the past few years wasn't too big on political parties other than the previous jihadi parties that had remained who share a specific identity with the Taliban. Everyone else who was holding higher offices, there were individuals who were all pushed out of the country once the Taliban took over because of lack of trust in how retributive justice they would enact. They're all gone. So right now, the Taliban have a lot of people that share their ideology with regards to establishing an Islamic government. And it looks like it will be all-inclusive. We just have to see as to whether the resistance that is forming in Panjshir, as to whether they would be on board with the inclusive government or the new government established or not. That is yet to be seen.
All right, Obaidullah Bahir, a lecturer in peace studies at the American University of Afghanistan. Thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Earlier, Afghan journalist Parviz Karo-Kale talked to business owners and residents in Kabul to hear how they feel about the new political situation in Afghanistan. Let's take a look.
When the Taliban arrived in Kabul, people were worried and were not willing to go out onto the streets. But now the situation has changed, and the number of the people on the streets has increased. They are feeling secure these days.
Today I came to Sharinat area in Kabul, and I'm thankful to them for bringing overall security and peace to the country. They have promised the people to bring peace, and indeed they are right in this regard. We can see a large number of people walking in the city. I hope they will bring peace and security forever. There will be no more looting, abuse, and robberies in the city.
Afghanistan's border crossing with Pakistan remains open for trade. Our reporter Daniel Khan reports from the Torkham crossing near the east of Afghanistan.
I've just arrived at Torkham, Pak-Afghan border, and the situation here seems relatively calm compared to a few weeks ago. I can see a smooth movement of cargo shipping containers carrying goods to and from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Only 2 weeks ago, there was mounting tension as traders on both sides had fears that the trade would stop. But after the Taliban took control of the border facility on the other side, there has been peace. I can also see people crossing the border, but only those who are carrying valid visas, Afghan identification documents, or a refugee card. Officials here say that apart from the usual movement, they haven't seen a new influx of refugees so far, but they are prepared if and when it happens. Meanwhile, security on the Pakistani side has been beefed up to keep a check on suspicious activity. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Torkham, Pak-Afghan border.
U.S. President Joe Biden has announced plans to nominate 3 new ambassadors to Tanzania, Japan, and China. Biden tipped veteran diplomat Nicholas Burns to represent Washington in Beijing. CGTN's Nathan King looks into Burns' career and the challenges he might face in his new post if he is confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Nicholas Burns has been a visible figure on China, often appearing on CGTN and other global networks to weigh in on the most important bilateral relationship in the world.
All the transnational issues, pandemics, we can't do much without China. I think that balancing these two imperatives is going to be vital. It's complicated. We can't see them as the enemy because we need them.
Burns' emphasis has been on the cooperation possible between Washington and Beijing on the most pressing global issues. In the Biden administration, he will also have to focus on competition and confrontation with China too. Burns will have to work alongside a high-profile team focused on China and defer to the National Security Council's so-called Asia czar, Kurt Campbell, and U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai, and of course work with an intensely hawkish U.S. Congress when it comes to China. Burns' selection as an ambassador would be a big win for diplomats over politicians. Burns has decades of experience as a diplomat in Africa, an expert on Russia, an ambassador to Greece and NATO. He was also the State Department spokesman and served on the National Security Council. The previous 2 ambassadors to Beijing have been politicians steeped in trade experience. Terry Branstad, the former governor of Iowa, who has known President Xi Jinping for decades, and Max Marcus. Of course, Nicholas Burns was not the only candidate under consideration for the Beijing post. Charlene Barshevsky, the former trade representative who famously negotiated with Beijing over China's admission to the World Trade Organization, was widely reported to be in the running. But for that reason alone, her appointment would have been difficult due to the current anti-free trade climate in US politics. Nicholas Burns is a known quantity here in Washington, and it's unlikely that he will face any obstacles during his confirmation in the US Senate. And in Beijing, he's known as a safe pair of hands and an honest negotiator. But that necessarily won't be enough to warm relations between the US and China. As you know, relations probably haven't been this bad in the last 40 years. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
And in news just in, at least 75 people have been kidnapped from a village in the northwest part of Nigeria. Witnesses from the village of Rini said the kidnappers raided the area on more than 50 motorcycles. They are also reported to have looted from the residents during the attack. Security officials have confirmed the incident. However, more details are yet to be released. This is the latest in a trend of abductions that have plagued the West African nation. While staying on the continent, the United States has deployed special operations forces to the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo to help the country's army fight against an Islamist militia known as the Allied Democratic Forces. The militia is considered one of the deadliest armed groups operating in the mineral-rich region in the country's east. CGTN's Chris Ochemringa has more from Kinshasa.
U.S. Special Operations Forces are in the Democratic Republic of Congo on the invitation of the country's president, Felix Tshisekedi. The troops will be based in the east of the country to support the Congolese army to fight against the Allied Democratic Forces rebel group, ADF. In March this year, the U.S. government designated the Allied Democratic Forces as a terrorist organization for its links to the Islamic State.
Notre coopération dans la lutte contre le terrorisme, comme vous savez.
This visit is proof of the bilateral cooperation between the U.S. and the DRC. Our countries are part of a global coalition against terrorism. We are determined to defeat the Islamic State and their partners, the Allied Democratic Forces. The U.S. Army will help the DRC Army restore peace in the East.
The arrival of the U.S. forces has been well received by some Congolese citizens.
Aucun pays au monde ne s'est développé sous la guerre.
No country can develop during war. That's why we support our president's decision to invite the U.S. troops. We hope they'll help our army wipe out the ADF, Codeco, and all other rebel groups operating in the east of our country.
The mission of the U.S. troops is set to last several weeks and will specifically target the ADF rebels. Civil society organizations accuse ADF fighters of killing more than 1,000 civilians in eastern DRC since 2017. In May this year, the government imposed a state of siege in Ituri and North Kivu provinces to try and end the killings. But the killings have continued despite the presence of Congolese troops and UN peacekeepers in the country's east. The military pact between the US and the DRC was agreed between the two countries in 2019. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi sought a strategic partnership with the United States to fight terrorism after his initial plan of allowing foreign troops from neighboring Rwanda, Burundi and Uganda was rejected by some Congolese officials. The move is a major shift from his predecessor Joseph Kabila, who was against seeking the support of foreign forces to defeat armed groups like the Allied Democratic Forces. Chris Ochemringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The world marks the International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism on Saturday. The day was adopted to honor and support victims and survivors of terrorism in order to promote and protect their rights. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the body will continue to support member states' efforts. This includes countering violent religious and political extremism, xenophobia, and racism. Officials say that the COVID-19 pandemic has slowed down efforts to support survivors and their families because of restrictive measures that have encouraged isolation. Acts of terrorism continue to harm thousands of people each year. A new report by the UN Counterterrorism Office warns that the Islamic State, also known as Daesh, is regrouping and spreading across Africa. The UN Counterterrorism Chief, Vladimir Voronkov, is urging for more support for African countries. CGTN's Chris Robert Nagila has more.
Their capabilities may have been degraded, but in recent months, Daesh has spread relentlessly across Africa. That's according to a new report by the Undersecretary General of the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Office, Vladimir Voronkov, on threats posed by terror groups. Voronkov says Daesh is exploiting the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic to regroup, recruit new followers and intensify its activities both online and on the ground. Since the start of this year, hundreds of civilians in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger have been killed by the so-called Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. The UN report says the weakening of terror group Boko Haram in northern Nigeria will likely strengthen Daesh's so-called West Africa province. The report goes on to say its expansion in Central Africa and into northern Mozambique could also have far-reaching implications for peace and security in the region. Voronkov says a global response is urgently needed to support the efforts of African countries and regional organizations to counter terrorism and address its interplay with conflict, organized crime, governance and development gaps. Also of concern is the evolving situation in Afghanistan. The UN counter-terrorism chief says Daesh has expanded its presence in Afghanistan and several Taliban members have been designated as terrorists by the Security Council. He says the international community must ensure that Afghanistan is not used as a launching pad for global terrorism. A global framework supporting countries requesting assistance is set to be launched next month. Bobet Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Don't go away. A high number of teen pregnancies cause alarm in South Africa. Plus, we'll tell you about the largest Benin bronze plaque ever made.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Let's turn our attention to South Africa, where numbers released by the Gauteng Department of Health indicate that over 23,000 teenage pregnancies have been recorded in less than 1 year. The trend of reported underage pregnancies and deliveries has left many shocked. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
You have to. A total of 23,226 teenage pregnancies were recorded by the Gauteng Department of Health between April 2020 and March 2021. Of that number, 934 girls between the ages of 10 and 14 gave birth. And just over 19,000 girls between the ages of 15 and 19 also gave birth during the same period, while almost 3,000 girls between the ages of 10 and 19 terminated their pregnancy. Education authorities have expressed shock at these numbers.
Shocked not because the numbers are high, but because this type of number has happened in one province. Previously, these numbers were for the whole country. But now we are seeing a situation where all these numbers of 23,000 teenagers falling pregnant. The pandemic has just made things worse because children spend a lot of time at home. And so we are afraid that when the figures are put together of all the 9 provinces, it's going to be mind-boggling.
A Social Justice Institute says it's not surprised by the figures. The Seoul City Institute for Social Justice says the pandemic might have highlighted this issue, but it's certainly not a new problem. The institute is considered one of the most influential social justice organizations here in South Africa.
We were not shocked. And the reason we are not shocked is because it's not the first time we see these numbers. Even in 2018, 2019, there were numbers. 2016, 2017, there were numbers. And the issue that is worrying us, and maybe it's not even a worry, but is making us angry, is the fact that we give it a name. You know, we say young children are giving birth, but we are not calling it what it is, which is statutory rape.
Perhaps education authorities are simply failing the children?
It's interesting that you say that, because the department has tried to implement a comprehensive sexuality education, and that was opposed by the parents themselves. We believe that this is not a task for the Department of Education to do. This type of conversation must start at home. School must reinforce.
It remains unclear whether these children were impregnated by their peers or adult males. Yudison Jamala for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A Nigerian artist has unveiled the largest Benin bronze plaque ever made, called Ancient Benin. The bronze work depicts the culture and tradition of the Benin people. Deji Badmus has the rest of the story.
When the people of Benin come out to celebrate like this, it's usually for something very special. And that's what this event is all about. This huge bronze plaque is the reason for the celebration. Weighing 2 tons and made of full brass, it's the largest bronze artwork to come out of Benin, a city with a rich history of bronze work. It's the creation of this medical doctor turned artist, Lucas Okoro. He titles the work Ancient Benin.
There is this misconception, actually a dissociation of ancient Benin and actually the Benin bronzes from Benin people themselves. Benin people are not associated with the Benin bronzes. We're not even associated. The museums that house these bronzes actually created the concept of ancient Benin as a way of dissociating Benin people from those bronzes, because ancient Benin became some kind of archaeological discovery, like they went and dug out the bronzes like dinosaur fossils, which is not true. You know, the bronzes, we're still been making them since today, even the same way.
The unveiling of the artwork comes against the background of the planned return of stolen Benin artifacts when British colonial forces invaded the ancient Benin Kingdom in 1897. A number of European countries have committed to returning the stolen artifacts, some of which date back to over 200 years. Okoro says his work demonstrates that the artifacts are not just mere works of art, but a means of communication among the Benin people.
Our bronze plaques and our bronze works were a form of writing. So in 2019, I actually launched a petition to have the UK museums officially classify the Benin bronzes and the Benin plaques as hieroglyphs, which I feel is important because they were a form of writing.
And talking about hieroglyphs, Okoro says his work here tells the story of a great king of the ancient Benin Empire and some cultural practices of the people.
The story here simultaneously depicts two things. It depicts the true story of Abayari I, but it simultaneously is depicting the Benin traditional belief in reincarnation. So in our traditional and Benin culture believe in reincarnation, and we believe that, you know, people have 7 lives and were reincarnated 7 to 9 times.
Okoro says he plans to give the artwork to the British Museum in appreciation of their acceptance to return the stolen Benin artifacts. Okoro's artwork has continued to attract attention, with many in Benin City coming to where his works are displayed to take a look at ancient Benin. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Benin City, Nigeria.